go ahead and get us started. If you all wouldn't mind joining me for a brief moment, and the manner of friends, a brief moment of shared silence to begin. Welcome. Thank you. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Anna Wyeth. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for this Conversation with Friends event. And if it is not evening where you are, then good afternoon, good morning, whatever it might be. Just a couple of very quick housekeeping items before we officially get started. I want to encourage everyone to keep your video on if you feel comfortable doing so. That will really help us feel the full participation of everyone who's here tonight. I also want to encourage you to change your Zoom name to include your full name and the way that you are connected to the school, whether that's your class year, if you are a parent of an alum or a current parent, a former faculty member, a current faculty member, however you might be connected to Sidwell Friends. And if you've never changed your name on Zoom before, you can do so by hovering over your own name in the participant list and clicking that More button, and you'll see the option to rename, and that's where you can add your full name and that information there. We'll ask everyone to keep yourselves on mute during the conversation just to minimize disruptions, and we'll save asking questions for the dedicated Q&A portion at the end of the event a bit later. So throughout tonight, if you have questions, please feel free to send them to me using the chat feature. I'm happy to keep your questions in a queue that we can ask during Q&A, or if you'd like to ask your question yourself during that time, just let us know that as well. Now, finally, to get started, I'm so excited to introduce our featured speakers. Richard Brady, who's a former faculty member from Sidwell Friends, a writer, mindfulness teacher, and upper school mathematics teacher from 1973 to 2007, was recognized in 2001 by Zen Master. Now, Richard, I should have asked you how to pronounce this name.
Thich Nhat Hanh.
Thank you. Thank you. Should have rehearsed that, but thank you for coming with me on that. As a teacher in his tradition with a special focus on cultivating mindfulness in young people, Richard is the author of the newly released Walking the Teacher's Path with Mindfulness, Stories for Reflection and Action, which is what we'll be discussing this evening. In conversation with Richard, we're thrilled to welcome Kim Seashore, who's class of 1987. She was a lifer and is a convinced Quaker, based largely on middle school learning from Peggy Kane, Doug Schiff, Richard Brady, among many. She decided by 9th grade to become a math teacher. After completing a major in math with a minor in teaching, she taught high school in San Francisco, followed by a decade of providing professional development for secondary math teachers through the Access Mathematics program and as the co-director of the Bay Area Mathematics Project at UC Berkeley. She earned a master's in mathematics at San Francisco State and a PhD in mathematics education in the Sesame program at UC Berkeley. And in 2015, Kim joined the faculty of the math department at San Francisco State, where her research focuses on teacher education and mathematics teaching that promote a more equitable and just classroom experience. She lives in a co-housing community in Berkeley with her husband, Jeff Hobson, and sons, Benjamin and Nathan. Now I'm going to turn it over to Richard to get us started this evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you, Zohar and Emma also, who are with us tonight. And thank you to Kim, especially, back from the past, a flash from the past, but more than a flash. And special thanks to Brian for making this possible. I thought it would be appropriate tonight to begin with a little mindfulness exercise. So some of us may not be terribly familiar with mindfulness. So I'm going to put I'm going to share a definition. There are many definitions of mindfulness with you on the screen. Let's see. Oh, this is a little large. Sorry. Okay, so let me just read it. Mindfulness means intentionally paying attention to present moment experience, inside ourselves, our minds and bodies, as well as in our environment, with an attitude of openness, curiosity, kindness, and care. So mindfulness is a certain kind of attention. And you can't have attention without an object of attention. So mindfulness is always mindfulness of something, specifically something in the present moment. And so that something could be inside ourselves. It could be paying attention to what our mind is thinking about. It could be paying attention to our emotions. It could be paying attention to our breath or some other sensations from in our body, or it could be paying attention to things in the environment that come through our other senses. So I'd like to ask you to pick an object, pick something that you would like to intentionally pay attention to for a couple of minutes. And hopefully you can find something, and it may be, again, inside or outside of you, that you can attend to with openness, curiosity, kindness, and care. Often it is easier to pick something inside where you can close your eyes and not have your attention disrupted by the 1,001 things that might come into your mind as you're looking at something outside, because there's so many cues outside to distract that attention. But just pick something. And I'm going to, as we say in our tradition, invite a bell. And then after a minute or two, I'll invite it again, and we'll come back to the screen. Of course, you can pay attention to the screen if you want to, if you find it of interest and you're curious about it. So before I do away with this definition, which will be in your chat, by the way, I just want to assure you that we are all born with this capacity for this kind of attention. For many of us, it gets a lot harder as we begin going to school. So I think I'd like to turn it over to Kim to see what she's one of the few people here that has actually read my book. So she's qualified to ask some questions. Kim?
Thank you. And it's just so lovely. One of the things I was attending to was the participants box. and the joy of seeing the names of people who have so many different connections to Sidwell and to Richard and to me. So I want to begin really with a appreciation for Richard for the book, just in case you haven't actually even laid eyes on it, but also the size of the book, because it has so much wisdom captured in it that I also have been able to access because I could read it without being overwhelmed and enjoy that. And so I'm excited that we get to share that with all of you this evening. I also wanted to say what a delight it has been to read Richard's book over the past 6 weeks, but also to engage in conversations. And I hope that our conversation tonight will give you a little flavor of that. And throughout the book, he asks many questions. And I hope that you will take from this the joy of engaging in conversations with others about the book. And then finally, to Richard, I want to say a thank you as one of your former students for inviting me to be here and continue to get to learn with and from you. It's been a long journey over many years. And I know that many of your former students who are here are itching to say the same thing. So I'm saying it on their behalf now so they can feel a little of that itch scratched, and then they can say so later. I think I want to begin with, the title of your book is Walking the Teacher's Path with Mindfulness. And I want you to think about, what is your own practice of mindfulness? How has that developed alongside your teaching? And how has that developing of your path of mindfulness helped you to navigate your journey as a teacher?
Simple question.
Totally.
How many hours is this? Okay, let me go back to 1984. Some of you were probably in upper school at that time. And I was on sabbatical that year, 83, 84, and I spent this winter and spring at Pendle Hill, which is a Quaker retreat and study center. And one day, the residents asked for a day of silence. And during the evening meal, a member of the group that coordinated this day read to all of us, to the community, a passage from a book. And the passage was about how to eat a tangerine. It was about eating a tangerine. It was a story of the author eating a tangerine with a young friend of his who was a big activist with the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And he pointed out to this young man that he said, what are you doing? Because the young man had popped a section of the tangerine in his mouth and then had the next section ready to put in. And he said, why don't you eat the section that's already in your mouth? And he went on to say, if Jim was eating anything, he was eating our plans for our next action. And so it was very interesting. It was a very interesting thing for me to hear as somebody who didn't pay that much attention to the food that was in my mouth, thinking about the next bite, thinking about finishing and going back to class and all those other good things. So I took note of it, and I found out what the book was and the author. The book was called The Miracle of Mindfulness, and the author was a Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese Zen master, who had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King. But I actually didn't start reading the book until 1987, in the fall, that semester of 87. I picked it up and I started to read the first story by Thich Nhat Hanh, and it was about his visit into a young family in Paris and a conversation he was having with the husband. The husband had an infant and like a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, I think. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, how is your life these days? And the husband said, well, to tell you the truth, between this and that and the other and the other and the other, I hardly have any time for myself. But then he said, but you know, just recently I've discovered something really important. I discovered that each of the things that I do can be something for me. Everything I do can be something for me. And so now I have unlimited time for myself. So when I read that, it occurred to me that some of my math students might benefit from having unlimited time for themselves. And so I brought the book into class. Some of you remember this. And I started reading. And as soon as I finished the first story, that story, everybody said, please continue. So every day I started math class with a story from this book. And eventually we finished the book, and then they asked me for another book. And we read another book called The Sun, My Heart. It was very interesting for me reading this because, in a way, it was like science fiction. I did not know anyone who led a life like this, who lived life like this. And so but I was still interested. I mean, I like science fiction, and it was interesting. But then in the next spring, Chris Anderson, who might be here tonight, I don't know, he was on the list, went off. He was a senior, and he went off and did his senior project at the Zen Center of Washington, D.C. And he came back the day before graduation, or the day before award ceremony, and gave his report along with everybody, all the other seniors, about what they had done during their project. And so Chris, there was a pretty good crowd of faculty, a few faculty members and a number of students who came to hear him talk about his several weeks at the Zen Center of Washington, D.C. and the Mother Temple in New York State also, for a very intense weekend. It was a good presentation. At the end, one of the students asked him the following question: Chris, so I understand that you sit on a cushion a lot now and you didn't used to, but are there any other changes that have happened in your life? So I hope I get this right, Chris. If you're there, check me out. You said, actually you didn't say anything for about half a minute. And then you said, there were actually a lot of things that changed for me, but most of them would be very difficult to put into words. But then he said, I can tell you one thing, and that is I am less angry. I was impressed. I was very impressed by that. On my way out, I stopped to tell Chris that, and to say that he was the first person that I'd ever met that was a meditator, and that I really wanted to investigate not just reading about that life, but actually meditating. And I was planning to do so because this Zen Center of Washington, D.C. was not far from where we lived in Tacoma Park. It turned out that I did get to attend a few days as a visitor at a Japanese Zen Center in California that summer, which was a really eye-opening. And I didn't quite fit in the Zen Center in Washington, which was unfortunate because it was so close. But the following year, I had an opportunity to, I have to admit that I missed commencement. I was given permission to miss commencement in order to attend a 5-day retreat by the author of the book, Thich Nhat Hanh, up in New York State. And I was sold and became a student of his at that time, 1989. 1992, I went for the first time to France, which is where his home was. He was in exile from Vietnam because of his opposition to the war. And so Plum Village, France, not far from Bordeaux in southwest France. And ever since then, I've been back there many times and been to retreats locally. And so I was doing a lot of practice in the Washington mindfulness community, which I helped set up, and which a Sidwell alum is currently has been attending for quite some time. But I wasn't bringing it into the classroom. I may have been reading about it, but we were not doing mindfulness practice. We were listening to the bell at the beginning of a period in order to quiet down or get a little bit settled, but not mindfulness like you just read about. In 2001, there was an opportunity to actually begin teaching mindfulness. And that was a course called Freshman Studies that some of you know. And there was a health unit, and I got permission to teach a class on stress reduction. And so what we did in that class, which probably anybody who was in it remembers, is that we spent 5 minutes looking at what was going on in our minds. And then reported back on it. And it turned out that almost everybody in each of the freshman classes that would come in a particular day had negative stuff going on in their minds some of the time. Negative thoughts, negative emotions. And so then I introduced a particular meditation for changing awareness to things more positive, as just an introduction, and something that maybe I know Tom. I'm looking at Tom. He remembered that. He remembered some of these things. So throughout that year, 2001 was a very important year for me, because besides starting to teach freshman studies, that was the year in which I was invited back to Plum Village to become a teacher in Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition, with a focus on teaching mindfulness to young people and to their teachers. And it's also the year that I helped start the Mindfulness in Education Network, which was an international network of educators interested in bringing mindfulness into education. In 2008, I coordinated the very first Mindfulness in Education Network conference, which was held at Sidwell Friends School. After that, it went to the universities, but its start was at Sidwell Friends. And every once in a while, I meet somebody who says, "I remember you from that conference at that Quaker school." All the while, I've been teaching, leading retreats, retired in 2008 to focus on, to be able to coordinate a conference and things like that. And I retired in 2007. And then since 2019, have been working on and then publishing this book, Walking the Teacher's Path with Mindfulness, Stories for Reflection and Action. This is a picture taken during one of my 5 retreats, 8-week-long summer retreats in the mountains of Italy, where I spent 8 days teaching my Italian school teachers about mindfulness with a wonderful translator. And so a lot has happened. I have changed a lot because of it. I'm definitely more patient in school, a little more patient at home. I'm more open, and my sense of humor is more obvious. And it's helped me immeasurably as a teacher, as a human being, I should say. first. And all human beings are teachers in one way or another. So I guess that would be, let me just say also that you'll find in the chat the URL, a URL for information about the book and how to obtain it with even at a discount from the publisher, which Amazon will not give you. So,
So I just have to say what I'm struck by as I listen to you tell that story are several things. The first is that was wonderful because that isn't all in the book. That's, bits and pieces of that are, but not in this way, that you tell stories in other ways. And it's really wonderful to hear your journey and to kind of see you connecting those dots. The second thing that I was struck by when you talked about unlimited time for myself and that your students would benefit, I just think about the number of teachers in the world who would so benefit by feeling that sense of unlimited time for myself and being able to view their teaching as offering that gift to them. And that's particularly a struggle as people move into teaching, that it just seems like an overwhelming journey. And then maybe the third thing, and the thing that I'm sort of curious about, is you started this journey, that your description of this journey was in 1984.
Yeah.
But I knew you long before that. And there was nothing surprising to me about getting this book and reading this book. And people who read it, I think, will have the same experience that I did of like, these are stories from our time together and your journey as a math teacher. And so I'm curious that, where you have sort of some lessons in the book about some of your practices as a teacher and how those have fit with this journey of mindfulness.
Well, let's start with doing homework. There are two ways to do homework, just as there are two ways to wash the dishes. One of the ways to wash dishes is to wash the dishes to finish them. Actually, there's three ways. One is to finish them. One of them is to get them. The second one is to get them clean. And the last way is to wash the dishes to wash the dishes. And the last way is the way in which you are involved with the washing. That is mindfulness. The other two ways are not mindfulness. They are a different kind of being with the process of washing the dishes. So I was aware that doing homework could be like eating fast food, that there's so much work that people are assigned that it's just, it's all you can do to finish it. So this is near the end of my teaching career. I was able to start every class with 5 minutes of contemplative practice. And the first day, which was a half day, really just short periods, all we did was spend, there was just a brief introduction, and we spent 5 minutes eating a raisin. And with instructions, it was a guided eating meditation. And, and
I'm sure high school students did not make any fun of that.
No, they didn't. No, they knew me. They knew my So, okay, after they finished eating the raisin, I said, now, I would like you to do your homework like you just ate this raisin. I would like you to really get the full nutritional value out of every homework problem that you do. And that is probably going to mean that you do not have enough time to do the whole assignment in 40 minutes. And that's okay, because you're going to get much more value out of the assignment doing 2/3 of the problems or 3/4 of the problems, maybe even half the problems, if you do them to do the problems, than if you do them to finish them. And so if you see a problem, if you're taking too much time, you see a problem that you already know the answer to, just skip it. Spend your time wisely where you can really get involved. So that that was one of the places that I brought my mindfulness into my teaching. The second one, and this is one that I had been doing before I was introduced to mindfulness, was using groups, small groups. A lot of my classes were groups of three, groups of four, I think, four primarily. And so we had been doing that. When I went to Plum Village the very first time, 1992, at the end of the first talk by Thich Nhat Hanh, he said, we're now going to go outside and do walking meditation for 45 minutes or an hour outside as a group. There were probably about 150 of us at that time. And I know that walking meditation is probably new to a number of you. And even those of you who have done it before may find yourself, as you do your walking meditation, looking around and seeing people walking very beautifully and feeling quite inadequate. And so he said, I want you to know that each person around you who is walking beautifully is not just walking beautifully for themselves, but also for you, because their level of practice is raising the level of everyone's practice. And similarly, your level of practice is raising other people's. So you're doing this as a community. And so I'm going to give you all stickers to put in one of your shoes that you walk in that say, I walk for you. So every time you put your shoes on and go out and do walking meditation, you'll be reminded that you're not just walking for yourself, but everyone is walking for everyone. So I got home, school was going to start. I had 1,000 stickers printed at the copy shop across the street that said, I learn for you. And the first day of class, I gave everybody a sticker that said, I learned for you, and said, please put this on the front of your book as a reminder when you start doing your homework. It's not just for you. It's for you and for the people in your group and for the people in the class. So I'm going to promote that sense of we're in this together. It's not a competitive thing. Sidwell does have some certain amount of competition. I was aware of that. I didn't think it would actually be that helpful in a math class. And then groups themselves, of course, people wanted to be with their friends in the groups, and I chose the groups. So it often happened that people didn't get to be with their friends for a while, but I wanted everybody to be with everyone else sooner or later. But I started to get complaints after a few years, they pretty vociferous complaints. And I actually, to admit it now, as this was not transparent, but I would try to get one of the better students in the class in each group each time. So there was a certain amount of engineering going on. And so I said, okay, we'll do something different. So I put everybody's name in a hat. And I asked one of the students to come up at the beginning of class and draw the names out of the hat of the groups for the next time. And that's what we did from then on. There was absolutely no complaints by the students. Everybody thought that was a fair method, and they were willing to accept whatever happened, because they saw one of their peers literally picking the groups out of a hat. Now, the last thing I wanted to share is something that maybe none of you know about, because it happened at back to school night. Back to school night in 2001. Mm-hmm. That summer, I had read a book called The Art of Possibility, and there was a particular chapter that intrigued me. And when that class started that fall, when the classes started, I asked all the students in my classes to write me a letter telling me to date it the next June, and just tell me, looking back over the year, what they had accomplished and how they had grown as a student, as a mathematician, as a person. And this was an idea that came from this book. And there were some very informative things that would help me get to know who the students were and what their own goals were for themselves in the year. Some of them said, I will have accomplished getting an A. And, I always appreciated it when they went on to say how they would have done that.
It feels like it would be wonderful to check in at the end of the year and feel if that was still their goal.
So that the other part of the story is that back to school night was scheduled for the upper school on the 13th of September, 2001. So if those of you who were around at that time, you probably know that something terrible happened 2 days before that, 9/11. And I just assumed that they were going to postpone back to school night. But no, it was not postponed. And so here I am thinking, am I really going to stand up in front of these parents and tell them all the things that their students are, all the mathematics their students are going to learn? And I decided that would be almost absurd on that night to have a normal back to school presentation. So I got school stationery and envelopes. And what I did was I said, all of your students a few days ago wrote letters telling me what they were going to accomplish this year as students. And it seems to me that this year is a very important year, not only for students and teachers, but also for parents and their relationship to their students at home. And of course, at that time, just 2 days after 9/11, we had no idea what was going to happen in the world. So I said, here's a letter. I'd like to invite you to do the same thing that your student did. But instead of writing a letter addressed to me, write it addressed to yourself and date it in June, and tell yourself what you would like to accomplish as a parent during the next year, how you would like to grow as a parent. And virtually every parent in every class spent almost all of that time writing quite a bit. And they put their letters in their envelopes, addressed them to themselves, gave them to me, and I mailed them to them the following June. So the next year, no parents were interested in that. It was what you call in education a teachable moment.
we may be entering another teachable moment as we try and figure out how we restart our experience of in-person schooling in so many places. That may be a particularly special lesson for folks to learn or to grow from. We're
running a little bit short of time, I think, aren't we?
So I wanted to share with you some of the questions that I think came from folks during the registration. And they connected to a question that we talked about a lot, which was kind of how your practice of mindfulness is connected specifically to your teaching of mathematics. Because I think there will be people who will see this book and think, oh, this is a math teacher writing about mindfulness. Kind of how is he thinking about either his own mindfulness or how is he thinking about engaging other students in it? So I'm going to give you a few questions and see if you can give me a few kind of short thoughts about them. Flori Fasinelli put out there, she said, would you address some of the specific needs of non-competitive underrepresented students who are perhaps in the lower quartile or who are from underrepresented minority groups, and how can increased mindfulness assist teachers and assist their students?
One of the things that I think has been a product of my mindfulness practice is more curiosity and openness to possibilities than I had previously. And when most of my students didn't know that I came from teaching at Woodrow Wilson right down the street. After my first 3 years of teaching were at Woodrow Wilson. And so when I was at Sidwell Friends, I didn't have any of those students, the underrepresented, up under the, everybody was above average. It was like Wobegon, So, but I sure did at Woodrow Wilson because I asked for them. And specifically, during my first year of teaching, I found a book called Mathematics: A Human Endeavor by Harold Jacobs. It was brand new, and it had cartoons in it, and it was easy to read, and it was incredibly interesting. And the weakest students could read it, do the problems, and enjoy it. And so
I was not a weakest student, and when I found that book, I thought I had found paradise. It was great.
Yeah, it's never used at Sidwell Friends, but the geometry book was used, and some of you might even have used it. It had the same cartoons, different cartoons, but cartoons. So I asked the principal if I could teach a course for what I called terminal math students who would take no more math, or weren't thinking about continuing on, as an alternative to the standard general math course. And he gave me permission to do it. So here we were. We had this, the classes were larger there. There sometimes were 35 or 40 students in a class. And they all had this book. But there was a problem, which was that the attendance was very poor in these classes. So there was a group of students, maybe about 25%, who would be there almost all the time. But the other 75% range from 80% of the time down to about 20% of the time. And so there was no way that I could teach a normal class and not have 80% of them fail, because they would be behind from almost the beginning. So I realized that the course would have to be self-paced. And so I set up a course in which students could, if they had been out, they could find other students who happened to be working on the same material because they were at the same place in the book as they were, and then just sit down with them and work together. And so every day there were different groups of students that were working, and not everybody, and the grades were not based on tests, but they were based on how far you got in the book. And so, it didn't work for everybody because some people just really didn't make an effort, or were out so much of the time that it was not possible for them to complete enough of it to get a passing grade. But it worked for a heck of a lot of them, and these were students from that group. So if they'd been in any other kind of course with a teacher who was actually looking at trying to get everybody to a certain point, it would have been quite another story. So I think that mindfulness on the part of teachers can help them be creative in what they're offering students. The second part of that question is, what about the students? And so I just want to mention my friend B.K. Bose, who is started something called the Niroga Institute, had created a program called Dynamic Mindfulness,
Mhm.
And this is a yoga program. And there's a book called Teaching Transformative Life Skills to Students. And he uses yoga every day for, I don't know how long the periods are in the school, to build and build and build on day after day after day, and give the students a sense of self-awareness, resilience, emotional regulation, and relationships through yoga, through the body. And so this is, you know, they didn't have very good luck with their minds in class, and approaching them with mindfulness of the mind and at that level would not have really been something that they would have been particularly interested in. But a lot of them were in touch with their bodies, and that's where they were able to get these skills, these life skills that would enable them, if they so chose, to continue on and learn in a different way than they would have otherwise. So those were two things I wanted to mention about that.
Fantastic. So one thing that I think of, and then I'm going to turn this actually over to some of our questions if other folks want to ask them. I still have 2 more questions that came in from the registration, but even as you were talking and I was thinking about this ongoing practice of mindfulness, and your definition that you gave us at the beginning, thinking about curiosity and kindness and kind of openness to what may be. I think about things that throughout mathematics we take for granted. Things like that we called students, it's hard to, when I heard you say it, I remembered back, we called students who were terminal students. And what a bizarre notion that was, to think about somebody who was somehow or another a terminal learner or terminal in some way. And that mindfulness kind of says, like, what were we thinking? Like, what on what level do we want even anybody to define themselves in that way, rather than as somebody who, you know, we talk about weaker or stronger or slower or faster, rather than simply eating their raisins and enjoying them and learning from them. So that's just as you spoke, that was one of the lessons that went through my head and that I was pulling back out. And certainly that I noticed as I was reading through the book, that many of your stories, you didn't answer the questions, you asked the questions, and you let us sort of sit on them at the end of the chapter. So I encourage folks to do that. I want to make sure that folks know that they can ask questions of Richard. I'm not the only one who gets to do this. And so if you haven't sent a question into Anna yet, go ahead and do so. And I was going to share one more that came in, maybe 2. We'll see if I get to them. But there's one from Licity Collins who said, Mr. Brady taught mindfulness in our math class. Can you talk about making that decision to bring these principles into a mathematics classroom and the risk and reward of doing that? And particularly for teachers who feel that sense of, I've got to cover stuff. How do you make that space?
Well, I'm going to answer it 2 ways. I mean, the simple answer is that when I had a five minutes of contemplative practice at the beginning of class, we got done just as much math, because the students were on target. They were there. They were totally present after the 5 minutes. Whatever the practice was that we did, they were just present. And what happened what happened in the rest of the class was dramatically influenced by what happened in those first 5 minutes. But the other more profound answer, I think, is that risk and reward. There's one thing that is both a risk and a potential risk and a potential reward at the same time, and that is waking up to the fact that there's more to life than we have been told. And it's actually seeing life in a much different way than we have been brought up to see it by society. And of course, that's a risk if you don't know how, if you don't know how to handle something different and new. And you would want to back away from it, and that's what's happening in the world now. A lot of people have found have ways of being very successful with the way the world is now, and they would not want to look at the world through mindfulness glasses, because they would see that there's other ways to look at it. And of course, the reward is the same thing, that there certainly it can be incredibly rewarding to look at life in a different way, with openness, curiosity, kindness, and care. It can, rewarding to everyone. Okay,
So,
there was one other question I know that came in.
yes, so I was going to share with that question, which was Barton Rubenstein sent in: how is mindfulness connected with the climate emergency? The mindfulness innovation paper and mindfulness. So that's how is that connected now as you're seeing it?
Okay, so I'm going to put something up on the screen, because in Great Britain, the government has been following mindfulness for quite a while, and they created something called the Mindfulness Initiative to actually study mindfulness in detail, and to see how it could be of use to the English people. And so here's a report that they gave. Oh, I have to share it, sorry. This is the contents. This is from their report from, I think it was from last year. Mindfulness, Developing Agency in Urgent Times. And you'll get the URL from this. You can download it from their website. But there's 3 chapters. The first is about the importance of mindfulness for seeing and gathering and receiving information, actually paying attention to what's going on. Mindfulness is very important, and of course, if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to contribute at all to the kind of world we are in now. Secondly, once you get information, you want to be able to make sense of it in order to make decisions. And so that's part 2 is about mindfulness in terms of making sense of information. And number 3, the doing. So seeing, or perception, understanding, and then doing, living in the world together, interrupting automatic behaviors, choosing the paradox of the being mode, and collaboration. So all of these are ways, and if you read their report, ways that mindfulness promotes agency, different aspects of agency. But there's more to it than that. It's really waking up to who we are and our deep connection with each other and to all species and the earth, and gaining the freedom to open our hearts to what Zorba called the full catastrophe. Because if we are not able to open our hearts and actually accept what reality is, we're starting on very shaky grounds, basically unreality. And we're not going to get very far unless we can accept the truth of where we are. And actually, I have a poem that I wrote, and I think Anna can share it now. It'll be in the chat also, but it's actually about that very thing. And I don't know, can you show it? Here it is. So this is actually the poem that everybody who receives a transmission to become a teacher in the Plum Village tradition needs to present a poem to Thich Nhat Hanh, an insight poem. This was my poem. And there's a story about that in the book also. So, okay, I think that's enough of this. And now maybe we can have some live questions now. That would be very nice.
Thank you. Well, friends, if you have a question, you may certainly let us know. We really appreciate the questions that came in beforehand that helped inform some of this conversation. We also, both Richard and Kim are happy to spend a few minutes following this to say hello and catch up and just have a chance to shoot the breeze and get to say hello to folks. So they'll be happy to stick around for a few minutes and do that. But I think at this point, it doesn't look like we have any other questions coming in from the audience, but if you have one now and are a brave soul who would like to ask one, you're more than welcome to do so. Richard, I think your question that you shared with me earlier was, what hasn't been asked that you think we have, what hasn't been asked tonight or hasn't been touched on that you would want to share with us in addition?
Okay, well, I've told you that that our math classes started with 5 minutes of contemplative practice every day. And one question that could be asked is, well, what did the students do during those 5 minutes? And so the answer is, there are 3 different kinds of things, or actually 4, that students did during those 5 minutes. The first was, the most common was journaling. So I gave the students journals, Pebble journals at the beginning of the year. And probably 3 days out of 5, they journaled. On Fridays, I tried to always have journaling on Fridays because that would be free writing. And they would write nonstop for 5 minutes. And I would, of course, I had my journal and I would be doing the same thing. But if I looked up and I saw somebody not writing, I would say, why aren't you writing? And oh, I'm sorry, there's nothing in my mind. So I said, okay, just keep writing. There's nothing in my mind until something shows up. So it was, just stream of consciousness to put it out on the paper. The other 2 days would be prompts. So there could be a story about, for example, washing the dishes, to wash the dishes, which Tom reminded me of at a Christmas, I think it was a Christmas event. He still remembered it, and probably others remember some of the things that, I think Ruben is the only one here that was in one of those classes. So, and
it looks like we do have a question from an alum, if you wouldn't mind taking
okay.
one. So David, I'm gonna add you here to the screen to ask your question, David Weinberg.
Hi, Richard. Great to see you. And great to see other former math teachers as well. My question is, so a lot of the things that you described kind of work pretty naturally in a class of 10, 15 students. A lot, I teach courses like that, but I also teach plenty of classes that have 80, 100 students. And I have various strategies for trying to break that down, but I guess I'm interested in, to the extent that you have worked with large groups of that size, what have you found as some of the most effective ways to bring these strategies to larger classes?
Well, I'm going to begin by sharing something that a professor shared in a group a number of years ago when we were going around the circle to share what we were doing. And he said, I teach in large lecture halls, and I come in and somebody else has been there just before me, and the blackboards or whiteboards or whatever they were at that time are filled. And he said, you know how Thich Nhat Hanh erases the whiteboard? If you have never seen him on YouTube, you should watch him, because when he erases the whiteboard, his hand dances over the board with the cloth, and it's like a waltz, and slowly the board has nothing on it eventually, and the students come in, and he is just standing there with his back to them and doing this dance with the eraser. And when he, and this is the professor, when the professor turns around, the students are silent. I mean, they know that this class will be different. Now, of course, it has to be different then.
Right.
So, but they're ready for something to be different. And I think that in whatever the setting, I want to have some kind of student interaction in pairs or small groups during any talk that I give. Because what happens in class, as far as I'm concerned, is a strong statement of what the professor or teacher's values are, much more so than what is assigned to be done out of class, because class time is precious. And the time out of class is unlimited in terms of what students may feel that they're being asked to do. So if you choose, so what you choose to do during class is really the key to setting a particular tone for the class. Eating a raisin will only get you so far. So, and so, you know, as I said, having, if there's a way to figure out 5 minutes of contemplative practice. So for example, this is something you can do. Another thing we would do in these math classes was any day that there was a quiz or test or exam, the way that we spent our 5 minutes together, the first 5 minutes were not to work on that, but to begin by closing our eyes and getting in touch with our thoughts and emotions. And of course, there's quite a range of thoughts and emotions prior to a test. And I always made it a point of saying, whatever your thoughts and emotions are, they're your thoughts and emotions. I mean, that's reality. It's about getting in touch with what's real. There's more to you than what you're thinking and feeling right now. But let's begin with just checking in. And then after the 1 or 2 minutes of that, say, okay, now let's go to the more of you than you may have just noticed. And I want you all to think of something in mathematics that you're proud of, some accomplishment that you've had. It could be learning to count to 10. It could be getting a tough problem right on the last problem set. It really doesn't matter what, but it's something that you felt really good about at the time. Go back to it at this moment and just hang out with it for a little while and just soak up those feelings that you had. And then I would say, after a couple of minutes of that, are people ready to begin? And usually everybody was ready at that point. I think once or twice somebody said, I'm not ready yet. So I said, okay, well, let's just wait for another minute or two. And then once you have started working on this test, if you get to a question that you do not know how to do, close your eyes and go back to that time where you had that sense of pride in your work and just reclaim it again. And then go back and, maybe even skip it and come back to it, but just don't worry about it because you are more than even that one question that's just one question. And so the third thing I did, which I think would be very difficult with a large class, but I did it specifically because originally because one of my Algebra 2 classes was having problems settling down. And I found out from them by asking them, the reason was the class was right after lunch. And so I took this problem to somebody who taught yoga. And I said, what can we do? Because the kids have very low energy after lunch. And he showed me a practice that we could do together. And I will just demonstrate it. Anybody else is welcome to do it too. So you have to stand on your toes and bring your hands up. And then you bend over, staying on your toes, and go down as low as you can, touch the floor if you can, staying on your toes, go back up, staying on your toes, continue doing that 10 times. So we stood in a circle. We all did that. People felt energized. And so we did that in these classes. When people felt tired, when people said, I feel tired, I need to do stretching, then we would do that instead of something else. But the main thing I would say is, and this was a very interesting thing. I had two students, neither of them are here, so I'm not going to say their names. I had two students who were good friends who used to, and they were both athletes, and one of them would trip the other one. Either of them would trip the other one if they walked by. And I'm not used to dealing with discipline in my classes, and so I wanted to find a mindful way to approach it. So I mentioned in my summary of doings, helping start the Mindfulness and Education Network. So there were maybe 1,700 educators in that network at all levels of education, including graduate schools, professional schools, and pre-K teachers who are using mindfulness. And so I just said, I described the situation on the listserv, and I said, I need some help. I'm looking for a mindful way to approach this problem. And I got 4 answers, but in the end, the one that was clearly the best one, they were all good, was Aikido. So I met with each of these 2 students separately, and I explained the Japanese martial art of Aikido, in which you do, if somebody attacks you, you do not oppose the attack, but you let the energy pass by you, and that kind of disarms the attacker in an energetic way. And so I just pointed out that when your friend kicks you and then you retaliate, you're giving away your power. And they understood that. That was not too hard. So then I said, if your friend agreed not to retaliate, would you agree not to retaliate? Both of them agreed not to retaliate. And so, of course, there was no point in provoking. So that was the end of that problem. But this is a network where you can ask any question you want about any level of education, about any setting, and you'll get interesting and probably very helpful answers. And I really didn't have a lot of experience with the pre-K or with large lectures because of Sidwell. And I would get emails from people saying, what do I do about this? What do I do about that? I would say, join the MIEN listserv and ask your question. You'll get an answer that I will not be able to give you. So that's the answer I'm not able to give you. Any more?
I think on that note, we should close our conversation this evening, knowing that you all have spent well over an hour with us, and we appreciate everyone being here. Richard, thank you so much for spending some time and talking with us about your experience, about the book, about everything in between. Kim, thank you for leading this thoughtful conversation. We are so pleased to have you be able to be here and do this with Richard. And finally, thank you to all of you for being here tonight and being here in community with us. This is exactly what Conversation with Friends events are meant to be, a dialogue and a conversation, and to be in community together. So we appreciate you being here. We have 2 more Conversations with Friends events on the calendar now, one in August and one in September, and more are surely going to be booked. So please keep your eyes on the alumni calendar and sidwell.edu/CWF, which I will throw into the chat. But thank you to everyone, and we'll spend a few more minutes for folks who just want to say hello. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful evening.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, sure.
This is a kind of a closing pitch for the book. the publisher, Routledge, describes this as a unique book. And that is a blessing and a curse. So it's a blessing because there's no competition, but it's a curse because nobody is looking for this book because they don't know it exists. The only way that they're going to find out it exists is if somebody who has read it tells them about it or writes a review of it somewhere. So go ahead. I have 1 5-star rating on Amazon now.
Well, you'll soon have another, because I have to say, really, it really has been marvelous, particularly for folks who are connected to Sidwell, because you'll recognize experiences and places and ideas and things that you know of in there. People that you know. Fran Cleaver made an appearance at one point, and I just closed the book and sat there and just thought about kind of all of the ways she had made huge inroads in my life. So I'll make that plug, but also it's readable. It's very readable, and it has just lots of delightful little lessons in there to chew on. So I just want to thank you. It really has been great.
Elle, who's in my screen, my partner, is the one who made it readable. she's my in-house editor. So I'm gonna bow to her and thank her.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, friends. Feel free to stick around for a few minutes. And if not, then we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to speak up if I could.
Yeah.
Sure.
Just briefly, I wanted to thank Richard for coming to Sidwell, agreeing when I convinced you that was the place for you.
Yes, Lori, thank you for telling me about it. Thank you so much.